Hello everyone, freelance fiction editor Miranda Darrow here, and this week's video is a review of the writing craft book, The Linchpin Writer, Crafting Your Novel's Key Moments by John Matthew Fox. I picked this writing craft book for the month of November because as part of the RevPit online writing community, we're hosting a Fall into Fiction event. And I'm hosting writing sprints and giving writing advice for the next 6 weeks for authors trying to get their first drafts of novels onto paper or screen. I'm working on my own novel too, and love the idea of honing in on the key moments to really find the heart of my story. That's why I dove in to find out what the linchpin moments are and how I can maximize them in my writing and in editing for my clients. Overall, The Linchpin Writer was an interesting writing craft book, but not one that I thought had a really unique approach, and I couldn't really think of ways to incorporate it too much into my editing process. The author had a little bit of a snobby approach to genre fiction, which was slightly irritating in most of the chapters because he used literary fiction examples over more popular commercial fiction. Fine, whatever, that's the author's preference. But the author's literary snobbery actually impacted the quality of the advice when he correctly identified moments of physical intimacy as a key linchpin moment in books that contain one. But then he dropped the ball and gave some truly dreadful examples of actual sex scenes because he only gave examples from stuffy lit fic rather than the much better crafted sex scenes that you could find in millions of romance novels. The author wouldn't know, as I'm sure he's never deigned to read an actual romance. But for anyone who has, this whole chapter fell completely flat. Especially me, I read a lot of them. Otherwise, I did like some points, and here are some of the most quotable moments. So, from The Linchpin Writer, a linchpin is a person or thing that hold a complex object or enterprise altogether. Linchpins hold together businesses or families or governments, or dare I say, books. So, for the writer, linchpin moments are where the reader decides whether to abandon the book or keep reading. If you flub these pivotal moments, there is no amount of literary resuscitation that can bring your book back to life. That's the quote. This is the author's definition of a linchpin, so I wanted to include it. I liked the concept of it holds these things together, and without it, it would all fall apart. Another quote, "What's the moment you became a writer? No other moment in your writing will be as important as this one. It's your writing birthday, but the story you tell yourself about yourself is a defining moment. It determines how you act and think as a writer. If you pick the wrong defining story, it will steer you in wayward directions." I like the concept of clarifying our writer origin story, and it got me thinking about my own. Do I think the author is a bit overly dramatic about the stakes involved? Yes. But he's taking himself a little too seriously, in my opinion, and this is kind of the hallmark of the literary fiction brand. For me, though, I thought about this, and the first time I saw myself as a serious writer was a memorable camping trip. My family went on lots of camping trips when my boys were young, and we were in a camping trip to South Dakota. I think it might have been 2016 or 2017, and I was obsessed with writing my really terrible novel about a hockey player that this novel will never see the light of day. But I thought it was amazing, and I wrote offline in a Chromebook, and I was terrified I would lose my masterpiece because there was no Wi-Fi. I forced my husband and sons to drive to the nearest town in search of Wi-Fi just out in the middle of the Black Hills so I could download and email a copy of my manuscript to myself in case something happened to this Chromebook. Ever since that trip, I have never worked on a device that did not allow the external storage of memory again, and I learned how to use a hotspot. But this was 2017 or maybe 2016, and I can't remember. We had a great trip to South Dakota. We saw Rushmore and Bear Country and all the highlights, including Wall Drug. And that was the trip where I wrote my first novel, a complete novel. And it was the first time I really saw myself as a writer. That's my writer origin story. Another quote from The Linchpin Writer is, "Beginning writers often believe that creating mystery means withholding 90% of the information and giving readers 10%. Well, the opposite is true. You should give away 90% and only withhold 10%. And Fox is correct that less experienced mystery writers and anybody writing a book that's got a little bit of a mystery don't want to give their readers any hints, which leads to disinterest and abandoning your story. You have to lead with the good stuff. Solve some story questions early on. Give the readers enough information to know what's going on and where and when and why. Don't have us just roaming around in a vacuum, but leave just a few things unanswered. And those little holes will niggle at your readers while they are itching to fill them. Fox's second linchpin moment is the description of the main character. Here's the quote. Most of the time when bad character descriptions happen, it's because you trotted out the very first thing that came to mind. An excellent technique is to write for 5 minutes to describe one of your characters. If you want to be brave, write 10 things about them and then draw a big X all over all of those 10 things and start over, start fresh. Try to come up with a description of your character that you didn't think of before. What you've done is you burned through all of the easy answers, and now you're going to excavate down to the good stuff. I like this exercise of discarding your initial impressions of the character and digging deeper to find more unique descriptions of your characters. These are descriptions that aren't limited to eyes and hair, which are both overused. The first line of dialogue revealed everything about the book, a microcosm that contained the entire book in miniature. The first line of dialogue often showed us the character's main concern. It talked in code about the rest of the book, foreshadowing what was to come. It contained multitudes. It was, you can guess where this is headed, a linchpin moment. It was a little like discovering a secret device that all the best writers used, but which most readers weren't aware of. If you didn't know this technique, you would probably blithely read along, even on your second reading. That's the end of the quote. Even though this writing craft book sometimes frustrated me, it was worth reading to pick up this tip about paying closer attention to the main character's first line of dialogue. I was amazed and went back, and I could see how it could be a linchpin moment that predicts the whole story, all while also being a usually short line. Don't make this a soliloquy or it'll come off as forced, but do be mindful as to what is the first line of dialogue that you have your main characters say, especially if you're writing in third person, and this is the first time that the readers are really getting to hear the main character's voice. If you're writing in first person, consider the first line of dialogue and the first line of narrative text, if they are not the same line. C, endings are not something you discover at the end of your story, like bing, the light bulb goes on and the entire story now makes sense in retrospect. Endings are what you should start with. You picture in your mind's eye the way the chapter or story will conclude, and then you write toward that, funneling all of the separate pieces together until you end up in a place that ties the story together. Here's where I part ways with Fox a little bit, as he's diminishing the validity of pantsers and their whole process. I do think that people who pants, or for those who haven't heard the term before, who write by the seat of their pants and make the story up while they're writing, they need to do a bit more work and revisions than the plotters, and may need to move things around and make the plot align for the ending to make sense. There's more than one way to write a solid story. I've seen it happen. Overall, this writing craft book, The Linchpin Writer, was a mixed bag. I'm glad that I read it, especially so I could get that tip about paying close attention to your main character's first line of dialogue. I hadn't been focused on that aspect at all, and I have been ever since I read this book. These are just a few of the 30 quotes from the book that I highlighted for discussion. If you're interested in joining my group discussion of this writing craft book, join my Facebook group. The link is in the comments. We discuss a different writing craft book each month. I'll also post a written copy of this review on my website, which is www.mirandadarrow.com, under the resources for authors, and it'll be alongside my reviews of all the other writing craft books that I've posted in the resources for writers tab. If you're interested in joining the Fall into Fiction with RevPit event, check out the Revise Resub website's article, which has the sign-up link for all the details. If you're following me on any social media, you'll be able to find links to that, and the link is also in the comments for this video. For more tips and tricks on writing, editing, and the writing life, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the bell so you get notice of my new content, on which I'm posting every week. Thanks for watching, and happy writing!